Alpha King Darius rejected his mate before the entire moon court. He did not do it in anger. That would have hurt less. He did it calmly, legally, with a crown on his head, a council decree in his hand, and a noble bride standing 3 steps behind him in white silk. Elise stood at the center of the royal hall, beneath a ceiling painted with silver wolves and moonlit thrones. Every pack leader in the kingdom watched her. Every noble leaned forward. Every court priest waited for her to break. A rejected mate was supposed to scream, or faint, or beg the moon goddess to reverse the bond. Elise did none of those things. She only looked at Darius, the man who had once touched her wrist in the healing wing and whispered that her presence was the only silence his wolf trusted. The man who had worn her moon ring under his glove during border negotiations. The man who now looked at her as if she were an obstacle between him and the throne he had chosen to keep. Darius lifted the decree. His fingers held the parchment too tightly, so tightly the royal seal bent under his thumb. Only Elise noticed. Only Elise knew that when Darius was afraid, he became perfectly still. Council Lord Varric stood beside the throne, silent, waiting. Behind Darius, Lady Marceline lowered her eyes, dressed as the bride the Southern Alliance had demanded. Darius's voice carried across the hall with flawless alpha command. Too flawless, too controlled, as if every word had been polished until no wound could show. For the stability of Silvercrest, he said, I reject the mate bond between myself and Elise Veyra. A sound moved through the court. Not shock, hunger. The court loved a woman being lowered where everyone could see. Elise felt the noble bride behind him inhale. Darius continued. The bond is hereby severed from royal claim. Royal claim, not heart, not soul, claim. Elise felt the bond inside her chest here. It did not break like glass. It tore like living cloth. Slowly, thread by thread, her wolf made no sound. That frightened Elise more than pain. Darius's eyes flickered, only once. Not enough to save her, not enough to stop himself. Then he looked away. The council priest stepped forward with a silver bowl. Return the moon ring. Elise looked down at her hand. The ring was small, plain, silver with a moonstone no larger than a tear. Darius had given it to her before he was crowned. Before Varric started whispering that a low-born healer could not stand beside the throne. Before the southern pacts threatened to close food routes. Before the council warned that if Darius refused the noble marriage, Elise would be investigated for unlawful influence over Alpha Command. Before Darius decided that losing her publicly was safer than fighting for her publicly. She would learn all that later. In this moment, standing before the entire kingdom with the bond tearing out of her chest thread by thread, all she knew was that he had looked away. Elise removed the ring. The hall waited for her to throw it, to curse him, to beg him to remember. Instead, she walked toward the council floor and placed the ring gently at Darius's feet. The sound it made was very small. That made it worse. Then Elise bowed, not to him, to the throne behind him. May your crown keep you warm, your majesty. Darius flinched. The words cut because they were quiet. Elise turned and walked toward the doors. No one stopped her. Why would they? She was no longer the king's mate. No longer future Luna. No longer politically useful. Just a woman leaving with the part of herself she could still carry. Darius watched her go. When her hand touched the door, he finally spoke. Guards. Elise did not turn. Stop her. The command rolled through the hall. Or it should have. No guard moved. Darius's head snapped up. Stop her, he said again. This time, the words came out harsh. Human. empty. The guards looked at one another in confusion. A murmur passed through the pack leaders. Darius stepped down from the dais. Kneel. It was not a request. It was Alpha command. Or it should have been. No wolf knelt, not one. Elise stood at the open doorway with rain beyond her and silence behind her. Only then did she look back. Darius was staring at his own hands as if his crown had suddenly become weightless. The noble bride had gone pale. The council priest whispered, "Majesty?" Darius opened his mouth. No Alpha power answered. Elise understood before he did. He had rejected the bond he thought made him vulnerable, and lost the voice that made him king. Then she stepped into the rain, and this time no command followed her. The lower healing quarter lay beneath the old aqueduct arches, where the city's oldest stone pressed close enough to the ground that even the rain sounded muffled. Elise walked there because her feet knew the way when the rest of her had stopped working. Her patients were there when she arrived, a young guard with command shock tremors waiting on the stone bench. He had been stationed outside a noble meeting room when two Alpha lords had competed for dominance through Huamand, neither of them caring about the wolves within range. His hands had not stopped shaking for 11 days. A widow from the Eastern Pack, whose hands still shook after her husband's death, in a battle he had been commanded to enter and commanded not to leave. She came every week, not because Elise could fix the shaking, but because in this room no one expected her to perform recovery on a schedule. A boy of perhaps 10 who had been forced to swear a pack oath he did not understand. He had not slept soundly in 3 months. The oath sickness made him hear commands in his sleep that had never been spoken. Elise hung her coat on the hook by the door. The guard looked up. "Are you?" He stopped. His voice dropped. "Are you still allowed to treat us?" Elise looked at him for a moment. She had been asked harder questions today. "He rejected the bond," she said. "Not my hands." She sat down and reached for the salve tin and began her work with the particular focus of a person who has discovered that keeping her hands moving is the difference between surviving a day and not surviving it. She treated 3 patients that evening. She sent the boy home with a sleep compound and instructions. She held the widow's hands for a while and said nothing, because some wounds do not need words. She walked the guard through a grounding sequence twice, talking him through it in a low, steady voice, until the tremors settled enough that he could hold his own hands still. When she locked the clinic door and sat on the stone step outside, she let herself feel what she had been not feeling since she placed the ring on the floor. The bond had not severed completely. That surprised her. It hurt like tearing rather than breaking, which meant some thread of it still existed, frayed and raw and wrong. She did not know if that made it better or worse. When Captain Riven found her an hour later, she had already decided not to cry in front of him. He was Darius's captain, which meant he was here because Darius had sent him. Riven looked uncomfortable in the way of a man who had been given an errand he privately disagreed with. He said the king needed to speak with her. The king needed. She had been waiting for that word since the moment the voice collapsed. She said, "You do not miss me yet. You miss what I held together." Riven's expression confirmed it. "He is asking, not commanding," Riven said. "He cannot command right now," Elise answered. "I know. Tell him to ask someone else." Riven looked at his hands. There is no one else who knows how to ask. Elise thought about that. She thought about the fracture she had felt inside Darius's Alpha command the first time he had stood close enough for her wolf to sense it. The crack in the foundation. The old wound that had been there long before her. She had never told him what she could feel. She had only stayed close enough that the wound had something warm to press against. She said, "Tell him I am staying here." Riven left. Elise went back inside and counted her medicine stock and made a list of what she needed to reorder and did not think about the look on Darius's face when the guards had failed to move. Healer Oren came to her himself the following morning. He was old enough to have treated Darius's father, which meant he had seen several wounds that courts preferred to call something else. He had a particular manner about him, the kind that came from decades of watching powerful people insist they were not wounded, and then watching the wound find other ways out. He sat down across from her in the lower clinic and set a folded healer's report on the table between them. He looked around the clinic before speaking. He looked at the charts on the wall and the patient names and the treatment notes in Elise's handwriting. He looked at the careful order of everything in the room. "You know what you were doing," he said. "I know what I was doing. You did not understand the mechanism." She looked at him. "Tell me the mechanism," he told her. The Alpha Command fracture had happened years before she met Darius. A border revolt. Darius had been commanded by his father to hold the line with his Alpha voice. Young soldiers. Frightened. Obedient because the command ran through their pack link. And they could not resist it even when the battle had already turned against them. They held. They died. Darius's voice had cracked that night under the weight of what it had been forced to do. Since then the fracture had been there. Hidden. Leaking. The kind of wound that powerful men spent their entire lives managing so that no one would see it. It was not weakness. It was damage. There was a difference. Elise had been sitting with that wound for 3 years without being able to name it. Her mate bond had not given Darius power. It had given his power somewhere safe to rest. A healing anchor, Oren said. He said it simply, the way healers say things they have known for a long time. Your bond is a stabilizing channel. It allows his command to move through trust rather than through the fracture. He did not know. He suspected. Knowing would have required admitting the fracture existed. She looked at the report, and now the channel is severed. The channel is frayed, Oren corrected, not severed, not completely. He looked at her over the table. The wound is not stolen, he said. You did not take his voice. He paused. You lost it because he cut away the one place it was allowed to heal. Darius came to the lower quarter 3 days after the rejection. He came without armor, without riven, without a decree or a council escort or anything that might have given him the appearance of authority he no longer carried. He stood in the doorway of the clinic and looked at the patients on the benches and the salve tins stacked in order of application and the child's drawing pinned to the wall above the supply cabinet, a wolf with crooked ears that one of her patients had left as payment. He looked at the life she had built in this place, the list of patient names, the notes in the margins of her mother's old healer guide, the empty kettle on the heating stone, the 3 chairs she had carried down here herself, because no one had offered to carry them for her. He saw all of it the way a man looks at something he should have known about, and did not bother to ask. Then he looked at her. He said, "How do I restore my voice?" Elise set down what she was holding. "That is still about you," she said. He said he was sorry. The apology was real. She could tell by the way it arrived without preamble, without setup, without the particular architecture of an apology, designed to produce forgiveness rather than simply acknowledge harm. He was sorry. It was not enough, she said. You loved me where no one important could see. The words arrived flat, not angry. Flat was worse. Anger could be argued with. Flat was just the shape of what was true. Darius stood in the doorway for a moment. She watched him find and discard 3 answers. She had always been able to see when he was doing that. In the private rooms where no one watched, he had done it regularly, searching for the true thing and then editing it for safety. This time he did not edit. He said, "I know." He said it like a man who had spent 3 days arriving at that word and understood it was the only one that fit. "Varric told me they would arrest you," he said. "Command theft testing." He said it without softening it. Elise looked at him. "I know why you did it," she said. She had had 3 days to piece it together. The pressure from the Southern Pax, the alliance marriage, the emergency authority. The particular way Varric had framed the choice, reject her publicly or watch her be imprisoned and tested by people who would not care whether the result was accurate. She understood the trap. "Pressure explains the betrayal," she said. "It does not excuse it." Darius did not argue. That was the first thing he had done correctly since the night in the hall. He left without asking her to return. She sat with the space he had vacated for a while. Then she went back to work. The moon ring appeared in Oran's report on the 4th day. He had been tracking the command residue scattered through the hall, following the fracture patterns the way a healer follows a wound through layers of tissue. The ring, which should have been in the council priest's silver bowl, was not there. It was in the council ritual circle, placed at the center of a binding diagram that Oran identified. After 3 hours of documentation as a legal frame for command theft accusation, the ring still carried the warmth of 3 years of healing contact. In the context of the ritual circle, that warmth became evidence. Varric had the ring, Varric had a case, and Varric had a document, already prepared, already drafted in legal language, already carrying 3 council seals that named Elise Veyra a command thief and requested her arrest. When this came to Darius, his first instinct was to send her away, not through any official channel, quietly, with papers and coin and Riven's personal escort, and a route through the Eastern Territories that the council would not think to watch. He sent Riven to her with the plan. Elise listened to all of it, then she said, "You rejected me in front of the kingdom. You do not get to save me in secret." Riven relayed this back. Darius stood at the window of his private study and understood, for the first time, that he had been repeating the same mistake in a smaller room. Public harm, private solution, as if the audience were the problem instead of the choice. He went back to the lower quarter the same night. He did not have a plan when he arrived. He only had the knowledge that whatever came next, he would not be the one deciding it for her. He found Elise at the back of the clinic, sitting on the floor with her back against the supply wall, her hands dark with command residue. She had absorbed from a pack collapse an hour earlier. She had overextended. He could see it in the set of her jaw and the particular gray at the edges of her skin, and the way her wolf was pressing very close to the surface, trying to compensate. She had stabilized a lower pack that was tearing itself apart under conflicting command pressures from 3 different noble authorities. None of those authorities had thought about what their competing commands did to the wolves between them. None of them had stayed to help when the pack link fractured. She had done it alone. She had done it because no one else was there, and the alternative was to watch people suffer a wound she could close. And she had never learned how to watch that without acting. Dozens of wolves had felt her in the pack link. She knew what it looked like to someone who wanted to see a rival authority. She knew it was the truth of what she was. It was also exactly what Varric needed. Darius crouched outside her reach. He did not move closer. He had been learning, in these last days, the difference between presence and claim. He said, "What do you need?" She was quiet for a moment. He did not fill the silence. She said, Tell them the truth." He said, "All of it?" She looked at him. "All of it," she said. He nodded once. Then he sat on the floor across from her, at enough distance to be present without claiming the space, and waited until the residue cleared from her hands and the color came back to her face and she had enough strength to stand without help. Captain Riven appeared in the doorway at some point. He looked at Darius sitting on a clinic floor and said nothing. He had the particular discretion of a guard captain who had learned that some moments required witness rather than report. Darius did not offer his hand when Elise finally stood. He waited to see if she would reach for the wall. She stood on her own. He accepted that. He left when she made clear the conversation was finished. She listened to his footsteps on the stone until she could not hear them any more. Then she sat back down and counted her breath until her wolf was quiet again. Lady Marceline came to the lower quarter the following morning. She came without announcement and without her political dress, and without the particular expression of composed beneficiary she had worn in the hall. She wore something plain, the kind of thing a person wore when they were trying to be seen as themselves, rather than as their position. She stood at the entrance of the clinic and looked at Elise with the specific awkwardness of a woman who has realized she was being used in ways she did not fully understand and does not know how to account for her own role in it. She had benefited. She had not engineered the benefit. That distinction felt important to her. Elise was not certain it was. Marceline said she wanted to know whether Darius had chosen her or been pushed against her. The question was careful. It was the question of a woman who had learned to be careful in rooms where direct questions got you dismissed as too emotional. Elise asked, "Do you want a king who chose you freely? Or a king who married you because he was cornered?" Marceline looked at the floor. Then she said, "Varric told my family the council would hold authority if Darius proved unstable. My brother was promised a minister position." She looked up. "I did not know it was planned before the rejection." She paused. "I knew the political calculation. I did not know the mechanism." Elise held that information for a moment. She was not inclined toward generosity right now, but she was inclined toward accuracy. "Then say so," she said. In public. Marceline's jaw tightened. "My family will survive testimony," Elise said. "They may not survive being connected to a council that framed a mate as a thief." Marceline left without answering. But she came back the following day with a written statement and Oren's name at the bottom as witness. Elise read it. The dates were clear. The promises made to Marceline's family were documented. Varric had not only pressured Darius, he had built an entire architecture around the rejection before the rejection had even happened. She set the statement on her desk and thought about that for a while. Then she went to see her patients and sent word to Riven that she would attend the voice trial. Not as defendant, as witness. Varric announced the voice trial on a Thursday. He announced it publicly before pack leaders, merchant houses, and the lunar court record, which meant it would be written down and read by everyone. The accusation: Elise Veyra, former mate of Alpha King Darius, had stolen and corrupted Alpha Command through illegal anchor bonding. Evidence: the moon ring and its command residue. Evidence: the Alpha King's loss of voice immediately following her departure. Evidence: dozens of lower pack wolves responding to her presence without royal sanction. If found guilty, execution or permanent exile under command severance binding. If Darius failed to demonstrate alpha voice at the trial. Emergency Council authority. Varric had given Darius one option that looked like two. The Moon Court gathered in the same hall where the rejection had happened. The same ceiling. The same painted wolves. The same crowd of nobles who had watched Elise place the ring on the floor. She walked in from the left, not from the prisoner's corridor. She was not chained. She had refused chains. The trial priest had allowed it on grounds that she was not convicted yet, which was the kind of technical mercy that felt like ice. She had worn the same plain dress she had worn in the clinic that morning. She had not dressed for submission. She had not dressed for performance. She had dressed for herself. Darius was already there. He had no alpha command in his voice, and everyone in the room knew it. He stood at the speaking position and looked across the hall at Elise and did something she had not expected. He did not look like a king fighting for authority. He looked like a man who had decided what he was going to say, regardless of what it cost him. Varric presented the moon ring. He placed it in the ritual circle and let the command residue speak for itself. The residue glowed. The court made the sound of people watching something confirm what they had decided. Oran stood. He said residue had two signatures. One could indicate theft. One could indicate prolonged healing contact. He said the original wound must be named before the residue could be read. Then Darius spoke, not with alpha command, with his own voice, which was the one that had been hiding underneath the fractured authority for 11 years. He said, "My voice broke before Elise ever touched my hand." The hall went quiet. He said it clearly, the way he would have said a sentence in a private room, without the performance of royal address. He said his father had commanded him to hold young soldiers in place during a border revolt when the battle was already lost. He said the command had worked. He said they had died because they could not retreat even when retreat was the only thing that would have saved them. He said the crack in his alpha voice had been there since that night. He said he had hidden it. He said Elise had not stolen anything. He said she had been quietly holding the space where the wound was still open, and he had allowed the council to make that look dangerous because he was afraid of what the wound said about him. The hall was very still. Varric began to speak. Darius said, Lord Varric prepared an emergency authority document before the rejection. He looked at Varric, not after, before. He had seen Marceline's testimony. He had seen the date on the document. He had spent 2 days confirming it through channels Varric did not know he had. The trial was not about protecting Silvercrest from command theft, Darius said. It was about creating the conditions under which the council could seize authority without appearing to take it by force. Elise watched Varric's expression move through 3 calculations. Then she stepped forward. She said, I did not steal his voice. She said it simply, the way Oran had taught her to name things. I held the part of it that was still bleeding. She looked at Varric, then at the moon ring in the ritual circle. But I was never born to be the bandage over a king's silence. She looked at the court. And the law that allowed him to reject me without testimony, without due process, without my voice in the room, is a law that can silence any mate who becomes inconvenient. Varric activated the ritual. He did it without the formal invocation, which was the choice of a man abandoning procedure, because procedure was no longer serving him. The pack link under the hall shivered. Pack leaders in the crowd felt the pressure. Wolves began to move, not with purpose, with the particular aimless agitation of animals responding to competing command signals. Darius's instinct was to push alpha authority through his voice and force calm. He recognized the instinct. He stopped it. He said, without command weight, "I will not order your obedience from a pack I have not trusted with truth." He let the alpha authority drop. The ritual weakened. It had been built on fear of losing control. When Darius stopped trying to maintain control, the fear had nothing to feed from. Elise moved to the center of the hall. She did not ask permission. She said, "I anchor the wound." She said it quietly but clearly. Not the lie, not the crown, not his claim, only the truth. She reached into the pack link the way she had reached into every command-fractured wolf she had ever treated. Carefully, without assumption, with the particular attention of someone who knows that what they are touching has been hurt before and must be approached with care. The agitation in the wolves stilled, not because they were commanded, because something in the room settled into something true. Darius's alpha resonance returned, not as the polished, controlled command frequency, the one he had been using to hide the fracture, as something that came from deeper than the fracture, something that had been underneath the wound the whole time, waiting for the wound to be named. Captain Riven heard it. He knelt, not because he felt the command, because he heard something in Darius's voice that he recognized for the first time as worth following. Varric was still speaking. He was still invoking legal procedure. He was still naming Elise's actions in the pack link as proof of independent command influence. Marceline's testimony reached the trial priest's hands via a court runner at exactly that moment, then Oran's records, then the date on the emergency authority document, then 3 healer reports confirming alpha command fracture patterns consistent with trauma, not contamination. Then, the account of the soldiers who had died in the border revolt, pulled from military archives by Riven 3 days earlier. Varric understood what was happening. He understood it calmly, because he was the kind of man who had prepared for most contingencies. He had not prepared for Marceline. He had not prepared for a king who admitted the wound in public. Celine, the head of palace records, read out the dates. The timeline was clear. Varric was arrested by his own court guard, because that was how Darius had arranged it, not by Alpha Command, but by legal warrant signed 2 hours earlier in front of 3 independent witnesses. The hall was quiet. Darius looked at Elise. He said, "Without command, without royal weight, without the performance of authority, the rejection was false." He said it to the court. The humiliation was mine. The harm was public, so the truth will be public too. He did not look at her for forgiveness. He turned to the court and said what needed to be said. She listened. That was the most she owed him. The reforms took 5 weeks. Elise was not present for all of them. She had patience to see. Darius rewrote the mate legitimacy law so that a bond could not be legally severed without testimony from the mate. Not after. Before. He restructured the command theft accusation procedure so that healer records and independent review were required before any arrest could proceed. He put limits on emergency voice authority so that a council could not draft seizure documents before the event that supposedly made seizure necessary. He added protections for healing anchors. He added recognition for lower quarter clinics as medical institutions, not rival pack structures. He did all of this and sent Elise a copy of each reform as it passed, not as a gift, as a record. The kind of thing that belonged to her because she had earned it. The kind of thing that would outlast both of them. Oren taught a 3-week course on command trauma to palace healers. The enrollment list was longer than he had expected. Riven began training his guards to follow legal mandate before voice command. It was not an easy adjustment, but it was the right one. Marceline left court with the particular dignity of someone who had lost a position they had not fully understood they wanted and had gained something harder to name. The rejected mate law was rewritten, not deleted, rewritten, with testimony, with process, with the voice of the person being rejected required to be heard before any severance was legalized. Weeks later, Darius found Elise in the lower clinic. He came without guards, without crown, without the particular weight of office that had surrounded him in the hall. He stood in the doorway the way people stand in doorways when they are not certain they will be let in. Elise looked at him. He said, "I learned how to speak again." She said, "Then learn when to be silent." He said, "I am listening." She studied his face for a moment. The fracture was still there. It would probably always be there, but it was named now. Wounds healed differently when they were named, she said. The moon ring stays with me. Until I decide what it means, he said, I know. He did not ask her to decide tonight. He did not ask her to return. He stood in the doorway of her clinic, where her patients' drawings were pinned to the wall, and her medicine stock was organized by application order, and her wolf had spent 3 years learning to call this place home. He stood there and said nothing else. And for the first time since the hall, Elise believed he meant more than hearing. She did not forgive him that night. She did not take his hand. She did not return the ring. But she left the door open when she went back to her work. That was something. That was enough for now. 6 months after the voice trial, the Moon Court gathered again, this time for a matter of law rather than spectacle. A young woman stood at the center of the hall, low-born, confirmed mate. Her alpha, a minor noble from the Southern Territory, had brought a decree. The decree was prepared. The priest had the bowl ready. The alpha stood with the particular expression of a man who had been told this was routine. The priest reached for the severance preparation. Elise stood. Darius was seated in the council observer's position. He did not stand. He did not speak for her. He watched. Elise addressed the young woman directly. Do you wish to speak before they call your silence consent? The woman looked up. She had been looking at the floor. For a moment, she seemed uncertain whether the question was real. Then she lifted her head. Yes, she said. The court shifted. The alpha's expression changed. The priest looked at the revised mate law. He stepped back from the bowl. The young woman spoke. She spoke clearly. For 4 minutes, without being interrupted. The alpha's decree was reviewed. The review found insufficient grounds. The decree was set aside. The young woman walked out of the hall on her own terms. Darius watched all of it. Elise did not look at him during the proceedings. She did not need to. The day Elise walked away, the Alpha King lost his voice, but the kingdom gained hers.